Soggy crickets and crackers, isn't it? Then we're going to keep on doing this, I guess. We're going to keep on letting people take advantage of us. Because we've either given up or we think we know so much that we know what's going on that we don't respond because we think we know that that's not going to do any good. I've been coming here every year for 10 or so years to explain, there's a way we have to do that. The very fact that you're feeling that explains that you're not in a free society. And they'll tell you the state's free. They'll say the people in it are not. In fact, they're not even talking to the people, but people think they are. So until we get our head wrapped up around this whole thing a lot better and realize we're born into a cage and we're going to have to figure our way out of it, or not, at that point I don't even know what people complain about. I really don't. I look and say, if you're not really willing to step up, really understand at least what I'm saying, what is the gripe? You're just a whiner, just a griper. And so it's a summary, hopefully, that we'll stand better for ourselves and we'll do things that we need to do to change things. And it's, to my mind, it's in my history of doing the researching and doing things, we can change a whole lot. We can do a whole lot pretty quickly. But we have to do it within a certain constraint. Why? Well, I said, we live in a prison. We've been born into a prison. People want to think you're free, or they don't recognize that the term freedom actually means a constraint of your range of motion. And in some regard, is that so unusual? You live in a society with other people. If you don't move out, you have to kind of conform to what other people expect as well. You're not the island of your mind. I mean, you could be, but it's not going to get you very far. And as I've found out, you can't separate yourself, segregate yourself, and isolate yourself. It seems that these other crabs in the bucket want to pull you down, and everyone wants to be equally treated. And then you see that in your civil rights. So I don't know what the big question is here. We're in a prison. The civil rights is an exaction of every kind and no other. That's not my opinion. These are not just things I pull out of the air or other places. Go read the fact of it in Title 42, Section 1981. If you think you're going to get away from the imposition of all that, well, that's what you're griping about. And it's really a continuum of how we are going to extract ourselves, really. And not everything is going to be so perfect, and certainly not. And why would we expect that from an occupying force anyway? They're not going to want us free. We're going to have to want ourselves free more than they want us captured. And there's a whole thing of a study about this in international law. And again, if I hadn't been through my path, I wouldn't really have these perceptions. I would likely have the perceptions I see out in the majority of the people who, even the ones that think they know. Oh, I've read the Constitution, so I know what's supposed to be, and so that's the way the world ought to be. Not realizing that there's an international law that says that could be overthrown, and you better be aware of that. What's the Libre Code tell us? The same thing. It says, you know you're not free when you're not free. It's in the occupier, in the presence of the occupier. They don't even have to tell you. It says it right there in number 1, Article number 1. And so we can make grand stories about what we think is supposed to be and how it's supposed to be. Here's this document, this parchment, and it's not going to really get us anywhere. It won't. It hasn't, and it won't. And so it's an uphill climb at this point, and we either decide to take it or we don't, and either we don't and be quiet like we maybe ought to be, given that we chose not to do anything, and this is really a lot of choices, or we're just whiners. And until I can see some of the mechanisms and the answers I've seen that work destroyed in their efficacy, then I'm holding to what I've researched. I'm holding to the path that I've found, the things I found on the path that I went on, which encompassed a whole lot of stuff. I can't even begin to tell you what all that has been. It just brings me here today to talk about the things I do. And I'm hoping I'm inspiring a few people. And it's easy to get lulled into, well, yeah, what he says is the truth, and so we're done. And then kind of just sit there and complain. That's not what I'm asking everybody. Everybody. It's going to take all of us. I keep referring to it's a republic if you can keep it. That's if I can say a truism. And this is the international law. That tells you there's an occupier out there that's going to come and occupy you. I can't even say there's not even truth in the dispute resolution stakeholder thing, because that, as I told you, as I can see and conceive of it, as we're told the stakeholder is. It's like likened to Genghis Khan and his horde. And Genghis Khan would come knocking on your door, and he tells you what Genghis Khan wants. And you're going to have to deal with that. And that's sort of how this all works. In other words, we're not really living in peace. And it's all this law that we will destroy and deny. It's all improperly put on people, but we don't understand about that. But all that's there to try and constrain this whole problem. The idea of nations is really this recognition that we're not a very good people. Peoples are just not very good. For as much as any one of us might be, well, how can I say? I mean, peaceful in our own heart, in our mind, and in what our intentions are. The majority of the world apparently becomes enraptured with the 7 deadly sins, if you will. And we're told about that. So we can go ahead and deny all this. We can ourselves not participate in it. It doesn't mean it doesn't start coming down. So rules have been made. And I'm not saying I'm embracing all these rules. I'm especially the ones in the last 40 years, which brought where the system itself. It's maybe an augmentation of when the people in power learn to tax everybody for their benefit. There's going to be no limit. It's the same thing, but on a different scale when we're looking at the things that I'm talking about relative to land law, property rights, and all this other stuff, and this foreign imposition that came in, which we can identify. And I sort of stick there because it's easy, really easy to identify. If you don't have to make up a lot of stuff to identify the type of thing I'm saying, and I'm suggesting for us. If you can see that one, I can lead you to others. And it's not conjecture or opinion. There's other styles of oppression. And they all really need to be dealt with. But what's interesting is when you get on the narrow path, they are all dealt with. Why? Because they're all beyond reason and law and morals. All of it. And so, I try to come here to invoke in you a spirit beyond being the whiner or the complainer or just the one who thinks they observe, or the documenter only that just says, oh, this is what I see, and then doesn't understand how to apply all this stuff. I guess that's the biggest thing I see. People I admire, almost like any of the people that I admire that are doing the research, if they're not turning that around and sitting back and saying, okay, now that I know this, where do I use it? I don't know many people that will actually do that part, and that's the bulk of society. It won't sit with what it knows and what it believes it can prove in its path of learning and research, undoing whatever was on us, and past and through our frailty and our own internal prejudices, looking through all that, coming up with a knowledge, and then not many will take and say, okay, how can I help someone by applying this? And so that's what I'm asking us to do. It takes a little bit more. There's more to it than what even I'm saying. But I mean, I'm trying to get you to the start where you start the more proper journey. I mean, I don't know where all that's going to go. I just know it's going to have to go different than where they're leading us by the nose, as I keep saying. Before I forget, I do all the time. This is BTWRLM 297. And I understand, if I was understanding in the chat last night on RLM, Real Liberty Media chat, maybe in the future we'll be putting in hashtag RLOG, and that might focus people when you do searches on our broadcast for Real Liberty Media. Maybe you'll get if there's a lot of people that do that, maybe you'll find us easily through the noise. And so, thank you, Vinny, for offering that. I don't know how well that works in the search engines, but it's something else. Like I tell you, put BTWRLM and the number gets you the broadcast through the search engines and through the filters. Hopefully, there's another one now, hashtag RLOG. I'll be putting that in my publications and all, and probably the tags. Hopefully, I'll remember, and we'll try to make that a normalization so that it's easier for people to find this information in the noise of the internet. So I've been trying to suggest to you, to all, and somewhat of a great resistance, that there's a law out there to follow, and then people take it up and say, well, we've done that and it don't work. And I'm saying you're not listening to me, because the law that I'm saying is to follow is the one that constrains the other side. And so There's a different approach, and as I talk with people behind the scenes, I notice when we have a little bit of chance, if I can explain a little bit of the interpretations, it's a quickly gathered distinction that I'm making. It's a quickly understood change, and it kind of brings to light what's really supposed to happen here. And I can only nuggetize this to say, when I say go into a court and use an equity remedy of injunction, and you make sure you write your paper to get a default, that takes out the judge and the system and the court, because it's a matter of law default as a matter of law. I'm not saying engage the system. And so if you don't get what I just said, you need to go look very carefully at what that remedy does and why I'm saying it has to go to a certain place and do a certain thing. And you take it out of all these control, that takes out of the control system. Now, when you do that, you have a different problem that develops, but that's not the point. You got to get on the path and start the journey and see your sights. You can't just say, oh, well, it's a problem, and don't do it. Get yourself to that problem, and then we'll look at it. Then we'll look at it again. In the meantime, people like myself are chewing away at that problem. And so you won't be alone when you get there either, at least from my perspective. And I'm asking you again, just engage this thing, use the occupier's language, learn a foreign language. It is a foreign law. It's a thing called legal. It's not so bad in lots of places. It's only bad when that thing out there called government and those people in it use it against us. And then when we look very carefully, it's completely outside of its actual authority. And until we as a people understand that distinction and that limit and actually articulate that back correctly, as I give you plenty of examples, and I reference the miners because we have a regulatory condition that can be placed on a miner who has a property right in the land, exclusive to that grantee, that is imposed upon him, which is just as wrong as any of the other things I see in society. So I can relate this to a very simple condition that I can show you the example for, that you can then just take and extrapolate that around wherever subject matter that you talk. And so I speak through the mining law a bit, quite a bit. And it's only an example, but it's principles, and it's dealing with administration, bureaucrats, and all this other nonsense that's coming on us is going to be identical, absolutely identical. And so when I say you get down the path, once you learn this narrow path and you see where all the criminals are off the side of the road, you're going to be able to address those. It doesn't matter where they come from. That path is still an objective basis, and that path, given you on the right one for you and what you're doing, is a shield as well. Now, that said, there's criminals in the world, and so that's a different problem. Get yourself on the path first. Get exercising your rights in the proper way, and you speak the language that the occupier is bound to. And so what have I been saying? I've been bringing up all these things. Look, be careful what you're handed. You're going to be given a whole lot of things to accept and choose into. We're advised in the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars document, you're going to be given a place to plug in. Your nature will almost drive you to plug yourself in, and that's going to be the biggest probably obstacle to this is you not wanting to plug into a system. And the way you are able to avoid that is you're able to understand the language of the system you're trying to plug into, even if they're not going to explain it to you. So it's always a responsibility of ours to do that for ourselves. And if you're doing it correctly, you can be an example to others if they don't really have an answer. And I don't say that because you're doing something for yourself, you will be an example. I see lots of bad examples. I see a lot of examples that don't quite meet what they ought to be doing, and they're just lucky they aren't more in trouble. Now, you hear me talk about a lot here. I'm not here to get people in trouble, that's for sure. And so, anyway, it's an analysis that you do. Learn to discern. You go through, I say, go read the black and white. Learn the rule that you're going to go into that's affecting you if you don't, anyway. This is what people, I don't think, get. And so let's get on to the tabs here. I was looking. I've already built up 60-plus tabs on top of the tabs I put for this broadcast. The information I can't get to. And I was trying to think, how do I get to that? I said before, well, I may have to have extra broadcasts just to get through the tabs, because I think it's information you need to know. And then I started thinking about that. 60 tabs. Even if I did a tab sprint, and I did a tab a minute, and I just went through and explained a minute's worth of things in that tab, it would still be an hour show just to get through the tabs that are residual on the broadcast I'm doing today. So I had a little bit of a slump shoulder moment. The reality of the amount of information that's out there is, again, so much. There's really no excuse that we aren't seeing it, but the amount of information to properly understand is immense, and I can only do what part I can do here. And so the way I've set things up has worked. You hear me come, I'm able to come every week, and I'm able to put what I can put out, and it's just what's out there to speak about and how and everything is twice as much as what I can get to in a broadcast, and I'm even doing, as you know, a summary approach. So I may or may not be able to get to all those extra tabs, and I'm not going to do it by telling you about it. So we're going to move on here and see if what damage we can do to the news and notice to us today. I've been telling you about this blockchain issue just a little bit to touch base. I think it's a good idea in one regard, but where it's going to go, where we're told it's going to go, the future that they want for us to tap into is not going to be a future for us. And so I've said, this thing has to be privatized. Don't try to seek all of this registration and stuff as we see. We can clearly see that's not a thing, but that's not a common idea for everybody either. But blockchain now, I've been kind of critical of a couple of articles, and I mentioned last time I talked about this thing, I said, well, people are giving over big fine money before they even do the due process that's available within the law. If they just read that, or their attorneys just read that, they wouldn't be paying up the money for sure up front, and the court came back and essentially said that. There's SEC, Sierra Echo Charlie, SEC hasn't done enough to identify the subject liability. And so this new article shows up just to point us out, and I'm going to move. I'm not going to talk more about this than I'm into the process side of. People fail to understand their due process rights they have, the limitation on government before it can act. People will be destroyed by all this stuff and have been. And here's another thing. All I'm going to read is the first paragraph. It's consistent with what I've been saying. The author finally comes to the point. It'll explain to you how there are some people, in fact, using lawyers who read the law and the complexities of securities law, who have understood to do what? Go read the law. And here it is. It's been It's been there all along, right under our noses, writes this author, the same author I wrote at Twitter and said, you need to go to due process. You need to see whether or not these people need to be are known subject, where the court said that the SEC hasn't done enough in making them subject before a due process hearing. Here, this same author now comes this time, and I'm not saying they're listening to me. I'm saying with any study, you start to come up to the point. How this communication system works and how you're going to learn and stay within the realm so that you can function within the occupations, even so. It's been there all along, right under our noses. The secret to raising money through an ICO without ending up on the wrong side of an SEC enforcement letter. Follow the law. And so this is what I've been saying. That's all I'm going to read on this. You'll read that article, you'll understand how they're doing this or what's being purported to be done. I say, watch. There's a couple things I noticed that were a little off, but nothing to stop this idea here. There is a monster and a beast and a machine and a rendering machine out there called government. And it has set up some rules that you live under. And if you're going to get into these subject matter areas, you better know its communication. This finally comes to the point. Go read the law and set yourself up in a way where the SEC can't touch you, is what I read. Put yourself in a place that you're immune to it. And I say, poof, at that point, poof, the government is gone. Subject to some extraneous action by a bureaucrat. But for the most part, the government disappears if you stay within the constraints of that law. In other words, that law exposes the expanse of the SEC's jurisdiction. And when you go do something, you do it just outside of there. That's not even a loophole. That's establishing and constructing a tool of whatever you want to do that's just not within their state, if you could say it that way. A loophole would be someone subject inside that does things that are acknowledged as exceptions to subjectivity. And so, eventually you're going to come to this point. There's a communication that you do. It's in the objective basis. That objective basis is actually a protection. if you're going to get into this type of thing, you're going to have to know what that is. You don't really need an attorney like they're showing here to do it. I've told you that. I've explained how this was going to come down. Here they come. Somebody is a group of people is already doing that. They're working it through, that they are staying outside of the jurisdiction, at least that there's no notice that they've been wrong. I guess I can say it that way. And as I was telling you, if there is that notice, that's your due process. You work through that. But you hold the government to that objective basis called the law, what they call the law, the statutes, the code. And so just another reference here, right off the bat, what I've been suggesting to you, demanding your rights, demanding the constraint of the government, it's done in a certain way. In this case, it's simply follow the law. You don't even know, I don't even know what that is relative to SEC and crypto ICOs and all that. The point is, that's where they're going. And they're not, this group of people is finding zero problem. In fact, they are now becoming that example I tell you become for those that way, that path. So I just wanted to point that out. It's not that difficult, actually. And you finally come to it. All these people that are so intelligent, they finally figure out, they're not talking about this being in the constraint, in the context of an occupation. So, and I don't have to talk about that, but that's why that you have to go to this communication system, because you're not free. I know that just shocked a couple people. You think you are, but you're not. Well, you're free. Again, you're freedom. You have a range of motion you've been gave. In fact, this rule of limitation will tell you that that's the limit, and that's the free range that you have to move in. I'm saying you make sure you don't get inside that limitation. You stay just outside of it. And here was evidence that that's possible, even in this newfangled thing called a cryptocurrency. So that's one way to address this. Another way is what we've been seeing that's coming down, which I told you again and again. A lot of this is repeating, pointing out I've said some things in the past, and you're going to have to recognize these things as you go forward and into the future, given you do anything, given you're not the cricket. And we found out in the RLM chat that in the game that's played right before the broadcast, this broadcast on Grimner's Blues and Rock Show, that if you are a cricket, the best action you're going to get is 24. You're only going to move 24 inches if you decide to act. When you stop your little noise making and you jump, it's going to be best is 24 inches. So that's not going to get us anywhere. Oh yeah, you could repeatedly jump 24 inches, but okay, who cares? So I'm asking us not to be that cricket. I'm asking us to take action. But I've also said in the United States, be careful if you take the action like we see in France, because that action will be subverted, and sure enough, not even the next week we get the proof of that in an article. France's yellow vests take a left turn. And so I said in the United States, it's already set up before you even get there, that if you can't protect against this infiltration, your movement, if you will, your action in the streets will be subverted. And it's happening in France. They're not actually protecting themselves so well. It doesn't mean that they're done. It doesn't mean that they're defeated. Your your action will be confused and maybe diffused and then distracted and then dissolved. And so you have to be careful about this infiltration. I told you it would be coming. It would be in the United States of America. Why I've decided to choose to do way out of the direction I've been going, which is to internalize your activity. Guerrilla tactics inside the system is essentially what it is. And no, I just said inside the system. Oh, see, you're using it. No, you got to get inside the system. It's not that you are in the system. It's not that you're using that system. You're actually using functions of that system against itself. But you're doing it as guerrilla tactics inside, and maybe not so much guerrilla tactics as the vigilant mass in opposition to a government gone mad. And if you don't, the crazies run the asylum. It's just as simple. The caucustocracy rules the day. And so that's all I need to say on that. The left, political left, may be taking over, and then we get into the extremist anarchists, that's why a lot of the places are the buildings are burning, and cars are burning. They take over your message. I'm not saying to not do this. I'm saying that you have to put that in the calculation if this is the action you're going to take. In France or in Europe, they have a better, they can get tens of thousands of people out, so they have a better chance to do this. I don't think you can get tens of people out in anything in the United States of America. Oh, we've heard about the Million Man March and the Million Woman this, and then this, that, and the other. And all that happens there is the same controlled opposition. As I pointed out years and years ago, you go to the steps, you talk to Dick Armey, you have Dick Armey talking to you, and then you don't pass him by as an irrelevancy and walk into Congress and say, here, this is 1 million people need you to know and do this. No, we go to listen to Dick Armey. He tells us to go, that he's doing it for us, and we turn around and walk away. And so it's not. We don't have a mindset in America to do the mass riot. Those are the amassing of people for a function. We can do it in small amounts. We don't do it like the numbers, and that then gets subverted. In fact, the subversion almost leads in America. And so you can take a different view on that. That's fine. For me, it's a decision I've made after doing it a bit and seeing the response to being out in the streets and doing things. It didn't get the response. It has a function, but it didn't get the response for what I wanted to see done, what the group of people that I was involved in wanted to see done, and certainly past that, it hasn't done anything. And so we all, again, you make your choices, and I'm saying don't not do it, because I'm saying if you need to go find out what it is to get in the streets and do that, go do it. It's very valuable information. There's always something you'll learn by whatever you do. And so the left may be taking over this, what began as a resistance to essentially globalism, sustained debt. What we hear and read, and I've read it behind the Woodshed Agenda 2030, as they're telling us the next goal set is. But it's a sustainable development. Sustainable means everybody's equal globally, and you realize that when you see it, it's in austerity, and they treat you like herd animals to make that so, which is what the wars are. One of the reasons for the wars is to make migration like herd animals, and you will herd like an animal. There's just really not much you can do when everything's stripped from you. And so we don't want to get ourselves into that because we're dysfunctional, like not having your health as well. But anyway, the next point here is how long it takes to get through. I couldn't get through these things in a minute, could I? So that somebody will infiltrate a function, you have to figure that out. When you want to start doing something, consider that. It's now part of the news now that it's happening in France. I told you last week, I hope that the global statement from the UN, the policies that are being presented, will make it and rise to the top. I told you that would be my concern was that it wouldn't. This type of a political left turn would subvert that. And you would see why. You know exactly why. So which means you can kind of imply, it almost implies, who's paying for that? It's not the people. And so we got to put that in your calculus of figuring out how effective, what you're going to do, how effective will it be. And it's attack surfaces. We get attack surfaces in this digital age. We have attack surfaces in whatever we do. And that, for me, is important. I always do and I don't know if I'm so good at it, but I do my basic analysis. It's one of the reasons I've told you the story about the Forest Service guy I finally met, writing letters telling them how they don't have any jurisdiction. They were trying to maneuver a way to try and make us liable in our mine claim. They never did it, but they were looking to put external power on pressure on us. In other words, what they do is when you start resisting, they'll find you, and then they have their military marshals thump down on you, and then they cite you into a federal court, and then you're fighting a federal court on the criminal side. I saw that coming I figured that one out a long time ago. They were never able to do that to us. And because we took away one of the major tools of their oppression on people trying to resist their crime. I finally met the guy that I was writing a letter to, and he says, "Oh, we've been looking for you." And that statement alone, with a big smile he had too, big smile, hearty handshake, "We've been looking for you." And I go, "What for? You got my letters, why aren't you answering them? What you been looking for me for?" Big smile back. See, they were looking for us because they couldn't deal with the law. And that was a big answer. And so you learn how to, even within that system, when you're addressing that system within its own structure, and you're using the structure against itself to weaken itself or to actually destroy itself, there are certain vulnerabilities that you're going to have to analyze as you're going through this to protect against. In that case, That statement to me proved out everything of my, if I ever thought I had a weird mind about being paranoid, that perfected the fact of that vulnerability was not exploited by the government when it tries to go and beat us down. I took that away from them. You're going to have to figure these things out as well. So this is when you get out in the middle of the field, get out on the riots. It's certainly impressive. It certainly is exciting for people when they are getting together to see that other people agree. It's certainly good when you're on a good point, on a moral point. It's certainly good when you're trying to go against a wrong. But that becomes that group target that can be targeted. I'm not saying ultimately don't do it, but you better really have that covered. I said that last week. You better be able to deal with that. Other things that they're working as we plug in, as they give us trinkets and toys to plug in with, to subvert any action that we might have to keep us ultimately, as they're looking, this is a government imposition. When I can figure out that if I do a couple things on paperwork before I even get to the problem, that they end up going back and using against me, to attack me, to diminish my ability to fight and defend myself, and put more load on me. And I take that away from them before it ever happens. I'm insightful enough before I take an action to build a record against myself that they'll use. Now I'm starting to get on the better path. I've proven out now that's the fact, and that works. And then I see these stories about the stuff you're given to buy into for Christmas and anything else, are us making choices ahead of time before something happens that we're typically oblivious to. We're blindsided by these things. EFF, the gift guide, what's creeping us out, was an article that came out, given we're coming into Christmas and given that there's an infiltration and a surveillance and people are infiltrated by information that they don't even know. You have to be ahead of the game when you fill out paperwork with the government on what they're going to do with it. It's not just what they're telling you. Notwithstanding the problems that they create within that, I'm saying they use that information to externally check you. And if you don't know about that, you will become victim to this point. I'm not going to even talk about it because I don't want to give out what goes on. Anybody who gets involved, you will find. And it can be directed once you're inside, doing what you need to do to cause the distance, the shielding. There's the facts you will read that tell you what you need to do to avoid at least vulnerability in certain attack surfaces. And I see this is one of the problems I'd want to tell you all. But first of all, it's in one ear and out the other. On the second thing, then what happens is I told you before, when the amoeba, the bacterial amoeba hears about this, the government hears about these things, they write legislation to block it. So when I learned that I think it was 20 years ago I learned that. That was actually, about 20 years ago. When I learned that, I stopped writing paper which found the loopholes. I'd stopped writing paper that insisted on certain things because they would change the legislators would change those things, in particular where it was about their revenue. And at that point, I stopped suggesting publicly to anybody what the answers are. Instead, I've had to resort, because I don't want those things closed anymore, if you can understand what I'm saying here. That's a weapon they were taking. They were a limitation against their authority, because this is an ongoing occupation, and they have the right to change that oppression over time. That was the basis for what I started to see. So you have to understand why I'm even looking at this. I'm looking at it because under national law tells me to make sure I'm paying attention to it. And if I give answers publicly, that gets changed. That gets away from us from being an answer. Now, if I can do it by getting you to read, and then if you don't quite get it, but you get into the game, get your sleeves rolled up, and you're doing something for a purpose. If knowing me, I could, and you have a question that's on the line with that, I can direct you to what you're looking at and how to look at it to see the answer. If you're not going to do it, you're either not interested and it's a waste of time, or you're not intending to do it right, and you can mess things up, and that's the other problem. You'll mess up stuff. So this is the thing about knowing too much. If you think you know too much, you start telling all that you know. You start actually spewing out to the enemy what their potential problem is before you got to use it. This happens to us all the time. Well, it doesn't happen anymore as it happens to us. It used to happen to us when we were dealing with public lands and these issues regarding the environmental terrorists. If you give them the answer ahead of time before you get somewhere, they've got that all patched up. And if you're getting the idea that there's a real war going on and there's strategies and tactics that you must apply, given you agree, you believe I'm telling you the truth even a little bit, and you give me that much license to tell you this is how it works, and you agree with a little bit of what I'm saying, you're going to have to understand that there is this war against us. I don't care what our opinions are otherwise. I don't care what we think should happen or shouldn't happen. But it's not. It's happened in some other way. So, this is a war, and there's certain tactics and strategies you must develop that you'll only know once you get involved. And so EFF guide what's creeping us out. They go through all this stuff I talk about, but in the offering to you of the toys that let you plug into the system that create the surveillance state against you. And the one that gets me is the very last one. I think it's the last one on this report, when it's actually being handed on over to your little ones, because that's the future, how this works. It may not get you. They're just going to get you to do nothing now so that you don't protect your little ones in the future. So I'll just go through the list of the headings. If you find interest, you can go read about this, what the Electronic Freedom Foundation or whatever these people, EFF, believes is a problem on their look, and they're not liking this surveillance issue. Go ahead, those of you that want to continue down your dystopian future and break that come upon you, keep invoking Facebook's portal. It's an in-home camera, folks. I can't even believe people buy this stuff. But anyway, FaceHome's portal. Then we have the smart home hubs from Google, Amazon, and others. And what did I say to you? It won't be the government that's the biggest problem in big data. It's going to be these corporations. For all the complaints I hear about corporations, I see people dealing with them and to do and foster and encourage these conditions of smart home hubs. Smart is not so intelligent, folks. Please tell people. I don't know how you tell people. Tell people. Expose what they're doing. Some people don't care about this stuff. I don't know about y'all, but those of us that do care, be aware. They're going to offer you every opportunity to plug in. Smart home hubs. This is really, when you look at the inside of these hubs, what they do is shocking, literally shocking. And when you see the technology coming on what's going to be in those hubs, if it's not already there, it's, I don't even know what to think about. It's so devastating what it has the potential to do. Let me just touch 5G real quickly, because a lot of this goes through the internet. My thoughts are turning more and more because of the only two things that the federal government is granting money for and its purpose. 5G, which is not just 5 gigahertz. It's a range that goes way up into, I think, terahertz. I want you to focus, for those of you who think about it, the 5G is maybe for the outside, but when you get up in the frequencies, those are not penetrating very well. And there's been a question, well, if they're not penetrating, they're not harmful. They're using 5G external because that's going to drive one of the 50% of the whole purpose for the federal 5G. It's to run autonomous cars. They don't need to penetrate. Now, if you're outside, you're going to get a skin effect. That could be problematic. The point is the higher frequencies don't have to penetrate if they're meant to work external. And the antennas on a car are going to be external. There's not going to be a problem. But they do need to not have a blind spot around corners and things like around trees. That's where I think that highway clearing device, goes 60, 100 feet back off the highway. That's all to put antennas down in there so that these vehicles can go. So for those of us that are looking at 5G, and when we get to the problem of, well, if terahertz are not penetrating and they're not harmful, well, the purpose for that is a higher frequency is not penetrating, but it doesn't need to be penetrating for the purpose or why 5G has been told to us is happening. The federal purpose is for autonomous vehicles. They don't exist yet, but they're going to build that infrastructure and capacity to make it so. Not been tested on you at all. Not been tested at all. You're all focused on the radiation, and there's these vehicles that be running around, which means they're either going to be a threat to you or you're not there. You've been removed from your own highways. And so there's a whole other thought process that has to go on. But let's get back to the internal, the home hubs. Remember last week I told you if you have a home hub, its radiation capacity of whatever frequency can be used, the anomaly of which can be used to identify you in your own home and track you. And so again, we don't think so deeply. We look at what the surface benefit that we're given for these things. We don't realize what the future may hold. But they talk about, again, we know law enforcement is involved in all of this. It's all part of it. Your smart homes are the surveillance devices. We now see they're going to be the internal radiation emitters, which can track you even if you don't have stuff. It's just the anomaly in the field they check. Verizon phones with app flash spyware. I don't know many apps that are not going to be spyware, folks. When you look at see what they're tying into your systems, they're all. So anyway, here's the list that's creeping out EFF, and here's the last one that really got to me a bit. This is not apparently not outwardly a problem, but it's what it does in conditioning you and your little ones. The elf on a shelf, or the Hanukkah counterpart, mensch on a bench. It's apparently a little toy that is made so that you can monitor children's behavior, and it's asked that you move it from room to room, and so that you can keep track of what the little ones are doing. Now, what's the problem with that? It desensitizes surveillance in your little ones. And that's going to work against them in the future. They just have to expect it. It's to be how they're trained into. And so you got fitness trackers, you got baby monitors, smart toys. Again, all this smart stuff's not so intelligent. Remember the smart vacuum that actually maps out your house? So that you get a smart vacuum, it maps out actually the floor of your house, and then how you distort the field that are emanating from all these devices is how they identify you in the room. And you say, but I don't do anything wrong. Well, that's until someone who wants to do you wrong looks at you. But anyway, so let's be cognizant as we're moving into gift season, the marketing season that put Santa's face on it. These are devices they call them smart. They're not. They're surveillance. They're planning to program you and little ones to accept surveillance. They are going on your front door. Face recognition is going to be everywhere. These identities. We also heard if they can see the bumps on your head, the distortions in your nose, and that determines who you are. So you may not have a real bad bone in your body, but they're going to see something in your nose, aren't they? And if you disregard what I'm saying here, you're really missing the point. In fact, you really should go watch the video right now. Go turn over to the pink fluffy unicorns dancing on rainbows and just watch that indefinitely, because that's the best we're going to see out of you. So here's the thing that got me was this elf on a shelf, bench on a bench, whatever you want to call this stuff. It's making surveillance normal, new normal. Then we read heavy screen times appears to impact children's brains. I think I got this from Jules' Twitter. And as I speak of that, I think Jules is firing up. It's coming back. Some life support came back to the UCY YouTube page at least. Maybe if you go back there, those of you that want to see what she's posting, it's not a lot, but it's some. I think it's her. I haven't talked with her at all. Got a little heads up from Chemtrailer over there in the UCY chat and on Chat Tango last week, and I saw some more going up. So thank you, Jules, for whatever you're doing there. I hope you're doing well. Even if it's in just the posting of even this broadcast. I appreciate that you did choose this broadcast, one of them. But anyway, heavy screen times is what she posted as well. I've talked about this. I want to remind you, as we go into gift season with the surveillance, the agreement that we train our little ones to be receptive. It's a good idea. On the surface, it's a good idea to keep track of your kids, right? Your little goats, and your sons and daughters. But that's not what this is all about. You got to think 3 and 4 steps down into the future. You can't think of what you think about it today. Someone has designed this for a thing. It's a plan, and I've always said those plans are your problem, whether you recognize it or not. And so we choose into all of this stuff, and that's I keep saying the voluntarism that everyone wants to promote that they don't see is they're living it right today, and that disconnect is serious. It's a serious defect. That's why we have to rearrange really how we describe what we're involved in. But anyway, heavy screen time appears to impact children's brains. You can read, folks. I can read on and on and on. It's here. They're telling us exactly what happens. Devices are shown to prematurely thin the cortex. of the brain's outermost layer that processes sensory information. It's desensitizing on top of your desensitization and physical action to accept the surveillance. The technology, and I have a whole lot of tabs I never got to that I wanted to put this together. See, the continuum of the information gets broken as well at the end of 2 hours and 60 tabs back. I was going to talk about this harm. There's a continuum of styles of harm that I wanted to be reminded of, at least in this tab, that it literally does. They're finding now these technologies do things to you. And in this particular thing, it's in the development of your little ones. And it goes on and on. This happened to be a CBS program, apparently, talking about this, but I'm reading an article. And again, I want to tell you and read about it because it's so important for you to know. But if you're not interested, why am I wasting my time? And as I say that, I'd like to again acknowledge Sound Minds on YouTube. I've been here 2017, I think, is having a live rebroadcast presentation that he takes, or whoever it is. I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody. I see the video. He takes and puts pictures with statements like Thomas Jefferson and quotes that Thomas Jefferson would have said, and then my audio underneath that, and then goes through all of these pictures. So it's kind of a neat difference. Something I wish I could do in real time that I don't think I can't. I've tried to work it out. It just doesn't. I'm not wired that way. He'll show you these documents on his reproduction, and I found it kind of interesting to listen, not to listen to myself more than to listen to what I'm saying and then read something that's on the screen. It has a different effect as well. And so, thank you for giving however many more dozens and more people access to the broadcast content over there at Sound Minds, and putting together a video for people to put in their eyes. It's a little different learning. You get to see not everything is on what I'm saying. It's on another. They'll put up something that's interesting to them in the same context, and I noticed it kind of has a different way of your mind works in a different way when you start seeing those. You listen and then you see. I noticed I was thinking about different things as well. Now, it may not have been exactly what I was saying, but that's not what my point is. You're getting another type of exposure. And I thank him for using the content of my broadcast in order to build the foundation for that. And I appreciate that, not because I want to have my stuff out there, but because I think I'm giving you information, pointing you in directions, giving you insights, that if we ever step up as a people, we stop complaining and whining and stop worrying about how deficient we might be. That was all I think a setup. And then we had our own foibles that we want to speak to our negative side, that we're not capable. We are. Stop dwelling in there and start working. If we find something that we don't like, then focus in on that and start to fix it. I do believe this thing starts to change. It won't happen overnight, but nothing, a freight train doesn't stop just because you don't like it coming down the track. Like as I said to Catherine Austin Fitz in a Twitter, because we don't want 5G or smart meter, just because we don't want it is not enough. You have to understand the language of the communication. And then you have to understand the requirements inside that. It's still weighted in the favor of the system, but it can be defeated. We literally do that all the time. And so that's the only example I have to tell you is that you might start to follow. Because I don't want to see people hurt. I'm getting tired of seeing people hurt. I'm getting tired of seeing people think they know something and then they go get hurt because they do so much. And then they look like a martyr, but they're really, in my mind, the martyr on the wrong point. It's like they walked into the buzzsaw thinking that they could outwill the teeth to be disappeared or something. I don't know. Instead of sticking a stick in the spokes, they kind of dove into the wheel themselves. I've seen this for decades. People do this. So here's the devices that you're going to get for Christmas that are smart, are so smart, they're making your kids dumb. And they're making them dysfunctional. They're making them less sensorily responsive. Now, doesn't that kind of speak toward autism? Am I saying that it's causing it? No. But could it be contributing? Well, maybe a little bit, you think? We don't know. Remember, one gene change in a genetic adjustment will make women sterile by the fact of having, it'll commit them to miscarriages in the future. One gene. And now the admission that the scientists don't know what they're doing. They're dealing in this. It's a wonderful little toy, isn't it? It's like a Christmas chemistry set. in biology. But that's all it is at this point, and we're now moving into literally into commerce with it all. So these devices are not very good. They lead us into acceptance of surveillance and acceptance that there is no privacy is perfectly fine, that other people can make decisions on that is perfectly fine. We keep buying into, remember I read here, EFF was saying watch out the Facebook faceplant portal, a picture, a camera in your door doing face recognition and all this, getting the surveillance database. At least TSA asked you. I mean, come on, I told you that the corporations were going to be worse. TSA at least asked you, do you want to go through this or not? They may beat you up after, but the point is they did ask. The government, the corporation just gets your consent by you purchasing, you're buying their stuff. And then it's not just faceplant, it's not just this internet virtual thing, web page that you all work on. Amazon's disturbing plan to add face surveillance to your front door. It's an ongoing assault. I guess that's all I want to say about that. We could read about it, but there it is. Our next tab, artificial intelligence experts issue urgent warning against facial scanning with a dangerous history. This is not even a new story. I've covered this a long time back. I covered it just more recently. Again, this is like looking at the knobs on your head and telling you what type of character you are. This is, I can't call it pseudoscience. This is just a bunch of nonsense put into recognition, these digital if-then-else statements. That's all this is, it seems to me. But it's given a brand, it's given an importance, and then people utilize it to their advantage to exploit against you. So it's not just faceplant, it's Amazon, and the science, it's all the Google, it's anybody that's going to build a product anymore. It's these hubs of information. They're making a net. They're making this net mesh of this stuff that they won't need 5G to actually put this in. They just give you access to the internet. They have enough power right now, I think, to do that with all the information that could be coming through this. But at any rate, notwithstanding that, the so-called experts they are telling us this facial recognition is dangerous, and yet here it comes, not without checking, to have people underneath the threat of better the benefit of better security or whatever, going to put this in their homes, and you put this on your door. Now, if you go, see, I'm looking at this, or someone that I'm going to go visit, are they going to have this on their door? Well, likely not, because I won't probably be there. They won't be my friends much, because they'll have a different attitude about life. But let's say now I'm considering whether or not there's the peephole is actually a camera doing facial recognition. And do I want that without notice being put into a database? I have no control of this stuff now. So we call the word ubiquitous. It becomes around. Somehow we were pre-programmed to accept this, even though they want us to do the elf on a shelf. They're gonna. It's in us already. It's in the so-called grown-ups. Artificial intelligence experts issue urgent warning against facial scanning. And how many products now we're talking that's all they're doing. And that does lead me over to the TSA a bit and the facial scanning there, and those that you might travel. Now, as I say it that way, I didn't really think about the broadcast in this context, but it seemed to be like a preparatory for Christmas, vacationing and travel and products and gifts and all that, but it didn't start out that way. It was more of the underlying surveillance condition and how we respond to it or not. And the clearing, there was a NextGov put out a discussion you may want to read, and I wanted to touch this because I found to me, it's a problem. And I don't know, I say to me, I hope it would be a problem generally of the content of this statement. I think it tries to be, here it is, the title, Clearing the Air Around Facial Recognition in Travel. So we have the experts saying that, hey, watch out. And then NextGov comes up to produce this article, Clearing the Air Around Facial Recognition in Travel. Well, to me, we still got the problem. But they go through and try to bring reason behind this, and they actually make some points, I told you, about the condition of the TSA, and that it's really not supposed to be for you, unless you agree, if you travel. It's supposed to be for foreigners. They actually mention that in trying to mitigate and tone down the rhetoric regarding facial recognition and the checking out of you at all. So let me just read the beginning of this so I can get to the point of it. By now, it's impossible to ignore the way that biometrics are cropping up in airports across the country. And anywhere else, folks. We just read it. It's going to be on your door, everybody's door eventually, apparently, and on everybody's wall in a net hub. The Homeland Security Department's Custom and Border Protection Agency is enabling the use of facial recognition, which in turn is encouraging all manner of innovative pilots, which several major airlines and airports for scenarios ranging from bag check to boarding. At a baseline, biometrics holds significant promise to enhance security, speed up, and smooth out friction in the air travel experience. I find they use this word friction, the rubbing. That's what they know they're doing to you. They're causing you friction. And this is what they're going to relieve and what they're causing, the friction. And you're going to find out when you read this word friction keeps popping up. And then I looked at that, when I saw that in a few stories, I said, this is a rolling out of a plan if we didn't know it before. And in this last week, there was these articles that came out to explain this very point, that it's becoming now a range of impositions that are coming, innovative pilots that the companies are now rolling out relative to travel. And, oh yeah, I can just hear it now. Oh, but I don't travel anymore. Okay, fine. This is coming to a house door near you. Okay, so, and without notice. But at any rate, getting to this, my problem with the TSA, or trying to make reason with quelling the I don't want to use the word conspiracy, the misinformation in this. On the surface, I agree with it. You need to get rid of all the rhetorical nonsense, all the nonsense. My problem will be in what they don't tell you here. And what they do go through is explain, let's say, the TSAs and the condition, how it actually might be better understood. And they deal with it in the context of myths. And they said there's a myth out there that airlines will keep passengers' identities and facial data on file. And they say there's a myth that facial recognition is aimed at replacing all current security measures. And there's a myth that facial recognition is a precursor to Big Brother scenario inside airports and beyond. And there's a myth that technology isn't currently reliable enough to be trusted. Notwithstanding what the expert just said. Okay? So this article goes through and tries to expose these myths. In other words, when you look at it, you'd have to take the opposite, that they're going to be explaining it's the opposite. This is not like a Big Brother scenario. My position on that is, how do you know? First of all, where was the disclosure on the extent and limit? If it doesn't, as they say here, it doesn't apply to people, U.S. people, United States of American people, why are they taking your information at all? Why are they asking at all? What database are you becoming noise in if they're only going after foreigners and for the security there? It's not what the discussion, which seems reasonable enough in this article, is. It's what they don't tell you about the limit or extent not being mentioned. What they don't tell you, but this is then acknowledging without any due process that they can make this rule against you. They can have these standards against you. They can impose the question, even. And then you find out when you get there, there's really no way to avoid this, right? Because it's on every, camera's going to be on everything. It's almost like a laughable, they say it wouldn't be a Big Brother database. When they look at through all this, it ends up becoming part of government databases. And so I wanted you to present this. It's a discussion, and reasonable enough so, about the myths that are out there. My problem with it is it doesn't talk to you from the legal administrative side, and it buys you into that what they're doing is reasonable, and that the myths answered eliminate all the problems. And so, again, are we coming at this and thinking clearly? I'm suggesting you don't have to be ever wanting to go through the airports to want to take this on as a viable thing to stop and find and test get the true limit. Remember, they're supposed to do this with the least imposition. And I've asked you to consider what's the legitimacy of any imposition if you're presumed innocent. And I would have to say, be careful on where I don't even know if they actually acknowledge that that's a standard. And you'd have to actually perfect that the standard of innocence, the presumption of innocence, is even something they consider. I mean, is it in the Constitution that they have to recognize it? And if it's not expressly stated, you better go find out how it's supposed to be impliedly enforced. So clearing the way, they want to make a discussion. NextGov wants to bring some rationality to this whole thing. Don't blow yourself out. I agree with that. But they're only seemingly trying to speak to this through myths, but that doesn't, and then imply that if you answer the myth and it isn't these grandiose errors of understanding about what it's supposed to actually do, that you actually understand the thing at all, let alone in the entirety, or let alone in the administrative imposition that may be way outside, if you understand it correctly, way outside of any legitimate need. To me, it kind of answered it. If it's not supposed to be used for United States citizens, even that term, what is the question? Why are they even having it there at all? They should have a special cattle chute for the foreigners only. Leave the rest of the people alone. But they don't. That's telling you something. This article doesn't address that as a myth, does it? And it can't, because it can't know. So we see now the word here, the friction that's going to stop all this stuff that's not, it's all going to smooth out because we're going to get you to just give us your face. We hear the experts saying, be careful when they do that. But here it came this week. I couldn't believe it. So this rolls right out. Everybody, not everybody, but here it comes all in the same week. The notice, Delta's new curb-to-gate facial recognition advancing fast. The comment was, this stuff rolls out pretty quick. Yeah, it rolls out real quick when it's a plan. And they're curb to gate. They're going to make just give them your face. I mean, at some point, I get the point. I get the benefit. But then they tell you that it's going to be friction if you don't. And they intend that against you, as I found this fascinating. They agree that they put friction on you now. And all I looked at that as that's the friction, that's the pain they want to put on you so you'll accept the easier path. It's no different than you get into a town, and I think I was understanding they did this in Paradise, California before the fire, long before. They're called road diets. They narrow the roads to let only a certain amount of traffic through. Complete violation of the granted disposal to that land for highways and the ingress and egress. But notwithstanding, this is the agenda working through the government, local governments that you had a chance to stop. They put these constraints and restrictions in the ingress and egress. And what they're doing is they're making it so painful because you're now into traffic jams that you use their public transit, because that gets preferential treatment. And what do? They walk you out because they put the pain on you, except for the most stubborn of us. They got you out of your car. Then they got you into a bus. And likely they have you in your mind is also getting you into a more stack 'em and pack 'em existence so you can justify its use easier. Doesn't mean you're going to get away from that fire anymore, but no one thinks that far. But it's the same, they cause a pain for you that you want to relieve. And the buses and the public transit isn't the only answer. You do other things. They also want you to get you into bikes. And then you find out that the bikes get preferential treatment. Then you start saying, maybe I'll get a bike. Maybe that three-wheeler, that little three-wheel pedal car don't look so bad. Because I'm actually traveling faster in that thing, in this bike lane than I am in the car. And this is how they work it. They put a constraint on you. They put the pain on you. The friction wears on you. And I get it. You just want to stop the friction, don't you? They're talking about that right here. And that the myth-busting article talks about it as well. It actually references this whole thing. Well, so Delta is going what? What'd they say here? Curb to gate. All right, well, I get to the gate. What about getting away from the airport? Well, Hertz has got you covered the same week. Hertz's airport facial recognition program uses customer loyalty rewards to change public opinion. Wow, that was a mouthful, isn't it? I've told you about the loyalty rewards as being the precursor. You went to Safeway or whatever store with your card, and the loyalty reward that you got was a discount and whatever bonus points. They got you using that. They did it like you did the elf on the shelf. They got you to do this stuff with the bonus card, the club card, the club they're going to beat you to death in the future. You didn't see it coming, but here it is. And now they're doing the same thing. Loyalty rewards for facial recognition use. Loyalty rewards is social credit, folks. It's the same thing we've been listening to about China developing this technology. It's rolling out in the United States as a benefit to you. To do what? Reduce friction. Getting you out of the airport much quicker, and who doesn't want to do that? But here, did you hear the extension? It wants to also change public opinion. Of course. That's the buy-in. That's the agenda running. They absolutely need the public opinion change. They can't kick off the natives to what they want to resist. And you won't. Now, I hope I'm lying right there, but so far so good. I've been pretty good at saying you won't and you don't. But look at what they're pushing here. And they tie this into what? TSA, DHS, facial recognition. How is third parties and government guidance not being a big brother database? So it might be a myth that there's a public database. It might be a myth that these companies are going to hold the data, but we don't know. And then all the evidence is, wait a minute, they're holding data. When you go after public opinion, you're going after the end game, folks. You're going after the long term. You're the occupier wanting the natives to change their opinions. And I'm telling you, the tools are in you, the failures are in you to get it done. And part of one of the failures is, I keep harping, a big little, again, harpy. But the Protocols of the Elders of Zion tells us, you've got this thing in you, you will not act. That's the cricket. That's why I mention it all the time. It's one of the main weapons against you. And then I realize it's also your improper action against something. If you improperly defend yourself against an aggressor, you likely will lose that battle. I say likely, there's always miracles that can happen. That's the pressure that's on this thing. So Hertz has some discussion. They talk about, they even say, I think I read this and I went to do a check. They reference something called Clear. And Clear's slogan. So we got another third-party accumulator of all this data. Clear's slogan is the exit gate without the wait. How cute and quaint, folks. How smart. Follows the blueprint to a T. What blueprint? Well, a Sensible Vision CEO is a company here. Says loyalty rewards, and the logical next step is the U.S. and the Good Intelligence founder, Ellen Good, says huge potential for biometric customer loyalty programs. You're going to give it to them. The blueprint is you're going to give it when they ask. There's going to be no resistance to this. You like rewards. You like shiny things. You're a bunch of groupers. I really had tossed on whether I chose crickets or school of fish. But anyway, they have it worked out. The company CLEARS, I thought I read that in another article. I couldn't find it, where they were using something called Clear. Well, that's another word. Go look for things clear. So I went and researched it. Sure enough, CENCLEAR, CENCLER, selected to partner with DHS as a certified community behavioral health clinic. And I would just say, just on these titles and something I've read before, this term Clear will be tied to this. Anything behavioral is this A2030 stuff. It's sustainable development. You will behave in the future. That's why they go to social credit. So it's right here. They're doing this. Clear is an attachment that's also tied into the DHS as a partner. Public-private partnerships are how they're subverting this due process that they're required. The third party doesn't have to answer to you. It doesn't have to answer even to FOIA. And the government gets benefit. It's the same style of trick when the Five Eyes governments, the surveillance agencies and nations decided that they would each investigate, they would each surveil each other, and then hand over information that the nation themselves could not get themselves. They could get from another country who surveilled them. So you're looking at that is the global grid. That's the global mesh structure. They agree that they will be surveilled. Each country agrees they will be surveilled by a foreign country in order to gain the information they need for to go after people in their country that they can't get within the constraints of the law. Which means it works. The law sits there to be done, but it sits there to be exploited. And that's what's going on there. We haven't stopped. But clearly is clear here that it is involved as an integral thing, idea, concept that's already been laid out. They've already got you wired, folks. They're just waiting for you to plug in. It's over and over and over what's going on here. And you say, well, that doesn't get me. What is that? I'm never going to go travel. Well, you're going to go down the highway. You're going to believe you're not going to fight against your right to use the road versus your commercial privilege, which they require a license for, your permission to travel that highway by committing a crime, but so much. Have you ever thought, do you think this stuff through, what I'm telling you, folks? If the Congress granted the use of the highway without restriction in the 1866 law of Section 8 to the construction and use of the highway for all lawful purposes, how is it that you are required to admit you do an unlawful purpose requiring a license when it comes to the state? Is a huge disconnect between people, their understanding of what rights are, the understanding of the law of the land, and the understanding of how it's been subverted. So you are going to now use that highway. You're going to go get your license because you don't. You make every excuse not to make, even with the license, an attack against that right, and as a fraud and an extortion against you, notwithstanding your civil rights, as to circumvent your right to use the road as Congress disposed to you. You will take on the state's liability, and you will sign it. You will agree by buying in, by putting your signature on the application for the license, saying that you do use that road not as a right, you use it as a privileged commercial purpose, as a crime that you need to be regulated for. And so here we move all this facial recognition, digital technology, and this real ID comes on into your state. You think I'm not going to go fly on a plane? I don't need to worry about the TSA and this facial recognition? Folks, Louisiana adopts digital driver's license. Is this new news? No, we're just now seeing that they're actually moving the plan through at least one state. And I'll say, the way I understand Louisiana, and still it's pretty Napoleonic, this is probably the worst one you could probably be in at this time for that. But notwithstanding, this is where now Louisiana is going to roll out their new digital driver's license app that I talked about behind the woodshed, was coming just months ago. It's here. It's called the LA Wallet, to confuse all you all up in California. The LA Wallet. Now that gives you LA as capital letters. That is the federal designator for that state, is it not? Am I missing that? Am I in error in that? I suppose every state will have their wallet. If you don't hear the crypto blockchain, leash chain, master chain coming down the pike, you're rattling on the roads right now. They'll have wherever your zip code designator district is, will be that type of wallet. CA for California wallet, OR, a WA, the WA wallet. That'll be a good one for Washington. The WA wallet, the wallet. That'd be a fun one. The ID wallet out of Idaho. Isn't that going to be interesting? And you'll get your wallet, but you'll plug right into this. You're going to have a digital ID. It's right around the corner. You're going to be tied into this non-existent Big Brother database, aren't you? Aren't you? Well, another myth busted. But here it comes. I don't even know what to say. You can read the story. It's here. They're bringing it in. They agree with it. There's all kinds of things that attach. Biometric security is the main thing here. I was also reading something quick. I didn't read the story. There's now been somewhere in some country, whatever, it might have been the United States, might have been China. They can take a 3D representation of your face and use it to unlock your phone. And that's legal, as long as they get a warrant to do it. Think about this, folks. What the prison and that we're walking ourselves into. But here it is. Louisiana is being the first to adopt a digital driver's license. It's unless you all start understanding what I'm talking about and start to lay out a strategy and a tactic to approach this, even if you have it right now, I don't know how you avoid this whole condition today. I don't understand it, and you won't have the tools at all, not even close. You have a right to drive, you think, but it's all wrong. If you don't listen to what I'm saying, you're going to go wrong. And where we're asserting what I'm saying, the government goes absolutely silent. So I don't know which way you want to go. I'd rather, for myself, it's better that they go silent than that they think that they have some authority. But here it comes. If you think that I'm not going to go get on an airplane, I don't have to worry about TSA. No, it's coming to a state near you. They're worried. I'm wondering now with all this state non-compliance needing waivers for the real ID. I think I think they're backing off because they realize technology now is just going to eliminate the need for that license. No different than your face becomes your paperwork, although you have to have your backups with you. What's in your wallet and your other documents. Your face is going to be that wallet. That's going to happen now with digital technology. Now, how does that get implemented? You will have to have a phone. There is no way this is going to be implemented. Eventually, this will have to be 100%. It will not surprise me that you get that the price of a driver's license goes up somewhat substantially, maybe up to $50 more, and they hand you a phone so that you can do this. And then you have no excuse. They register you to vote. They create a bank account. They go ahead and give you your social credit. It's all right there at the motor vehicle department, don't you know? Did you see this coming, folks? So I'm not going to fly. I don't have to worry about TSA. No. This country, United States of America, it went every country. It went to what, folks? It went into no judicial recognition. It's now into executive expedience. Why? Because we live in a nation of crickets. We don't understand anymore what is up and what is down. We love shiny rewards and things. We are losing the moral capacity, I think, that we ought to have kept, as well as to keep our government the way it was supposed to be limited would have meant that we kept our moral backbone. And I think we may have been remiss to be paying attention to that. Louisiana is going to your digital ID. You have a QR code. You have your picture. It's all agreed to by the state. You can exchange that with the cop who's going to cite you. I don't even know how you now avoid. See, what I'm telling you people to do now, when you can do so on paperwork, between the time you get a ticket and go to the court and then go to the Secretary of State of your state and say, hey, wait a minute, that's a fiction that doesn't exist. So the officer wrote a fraud on the paper, so this thing needs to be set aside as a nugget little point that may or may not work for you, but it's there in the rules to go do. But you're not going to be able to do that now. And so you see, they're already ahead of us. There is no remedy against this thing. You hand them your phone. They get the information from you. Why? Because you signed up for the phone. You've signed up for the ID. You signed up to be in that system. You didn't assert a right against their imposition. You didn't listen behind the woodshed, and if you did, you never acted to fortify yourself in order to be able to respond. I don't even know what more to say, but here it is. The TSA is right in your face. In Louisiana, there you go, folks. It's coming. It's right around the corner. Keep being crickets. Now, another thing popped up. Another impositions. But another thing that's been determined to be okay. You think this exactions of every kind imposed, this extortion on you, is a joke? We heard about it in Obamacare. And a report came through that said that the Obamacare, the federal judge rules Obamacare was unconstitutional. I saw a bit of fanfare over this, but when you look very carefully at what happened in the case, I'm not so sure. Again, to me, looking down into the future, it's not just in this regard that it's, well, first of all, it has been ruled unconstitutional, but for a reason I don't think it's valid, actually. This judge seemed to take the severability clause a little bit a little bit to the extreme, and I think he grabbed more than he actually could. And the whole point about this is in the future, you're going to be underneath this care, this government care, and they have to get you there. My problem with this whole thing is it's never been argued, and the Supreme Court didn't take it up, that this tax bill measure that was determined by the Supreme Court to be such did not originate out of the House. And I don't see anybody discussing that, and this case doesn't discuss it either, which would invalidate the Obamacare. It would require that they do it over again, completely. But this judge said that the provision of a penalty against those that didn't get it, that was going to come into force and effect in January, that you wouldn't be penalized if you didn't get it, invalidated the entirety of this Obamacare medical treatment scam that they're putting on everybody. And I think you need to look very carefully at this. This was set up to probably go to the Supreme Court, because they can't let this stand this way. Not that they can't let it stand to kill it. It was not done on a proper reasoning, it seems to me. Just because a penalty for not getting the plan goes into effect to not penalize those that don't get it doesn't invalidate the whole thing. And I just said it that way. If you agree with that, then you can't agree that this decision can continue this way. If you don't agree with it, I'd like to hear your reasoning behind how removing a penalty from someone invalidates the rest. And I'm just assuming that there's a severability clause in the Act so that if one part's found invalid, the rest stands relative to its imputed purpose. So Obamacare, at least at this point, it's ruled unconstitutional. I didn't hear a big uproar within the medical mutual aid society insurance company, so I don't know that this is going very far. But neither here nor there. What they want to do, and you're going to look forward to this, is they need to make an adjustment in this so it's much more universal. And there was a problem in the way that they were going to penalize people for not getting it. That was actually showing a weakness in the system of it. And they're going to remove that, but they're going to have to still impose it. So this is not really going to go away in my view. And I don't think it's going to go away. The way the future plan is, they need everybody on a servitude. The way this will work will be through your phones as well. It may not be a phone. What I'm saying is there's the digital technology that's keeping track of all this. Remember we heard early on, the doctors would be sent your file, and what the doctor that's looking at you and examining you would send his report, and he would have to wait for an answer from the death squad over whether or not they were going to be treated for something. That's not in place yet. And so we look forward to that. Of course, I was happy to hear the unconstitutionally called out, but I'm going to be skeptical here. I really don't think that it ultimately doesn't incorporate. They're going to enforce it, and what I think they're doing ultimately, they certainly need some adjustments. It isn't quite what they wanted. They also want to legitimize it with multiple decisions to the Supreme Court, while they're not speaking to something like the origination of the bill in the Senate, as opposed to lawfully and constitutionally in the House. And yet, so in the future, you'll be able to. People will point. Well, there's three court cases in the Supreme. Went to the Supreme Court and validated this law, and they're going to attempt to blow by the fact of its origination as one problem I saw in it. We talked about this years ago. Now, I also want to remind people. Look into the future as well. In January, what happens? The House becomes democratically driven. They do get the majority. Now, what do they get to do? They can literally make a new law that overrides this and does exactly what they want to do, even based on this court case, to fix it. And what they'll fix is the problems they have, and the Democratic Party will be able to do it. And they'll come out and say, look what they did for everybody, and it'll be another big devastation. Not that the Republicans don't do it, because they didn't do what they should have done when they could have. But the Democrats will be able to change it. They now have an impetus to change it. So be careful of what this court case might do. And now the Democrats have this majority that they can push through to get this stuff fixed a bit. So just be careful on what we think is going on here. And be careful now that we see the integration of all this digital technology to bring the databases forward together, to tie it to you, to chain it to you, the blockchain. You can be chained to this block, folks. And this is a fairly encompassing condition. When they said cradle to grave, they were not joking. And this, again, is a definition of a prison that you may or may be transparent to you. Oh, you may know you don't like things, but I'm talking about a real prison. When you start getting into the conditions like we see Elf on a Shelf, your mind is chained to the servitude as well. And can you understand the conditioning of a little one who doesn't know any better, no different than us? How far do we go through life thinking that, life was pretty rosy in the United States of America? And then we come to a certain time, and it's not that way. And I look over real quickly, I see Beetle. Thank you, Beetle, for tuning in. Any good news? Yeah, you have a choice to make. And that choice could be your good news. And I know that may not satisfy lots of people, but that's it. You will choose your good news. I mean, listen, the world's pretty a wonderful place. It's some people in it that are causing trouble. And then there's a lot of us. Not that we're overpopulated, there's just lots of us that want to do things. But our good news is in us. And are we going to step up in our own responsibility to make that so? And I don't know if that satisfies your question or not, but I know that's part of it. And maybe I'm a little bit of an optimist, maybe I'm a lot of an optimist. But not that I see rosy times, but because I don't see lots of rosy times, but I do see that our answer is us. And all of us right now would fix a lot of this. But as long as we're fighting each other, even arguments in the chats, whatever, even amongst people that are we all part of the choir. The choir participants are arguing with each other. We're never going to get past into what I'm talking about. Nothing that's going to happen. And yet our answer is right there. It's us really trying to refocus our attention on responsibility to ourselves and then to each other. And our good news is us looking, what world do we want? And really moving to make it so, as trite as that might sound. So, getting back over to the tabs here, the judge rules that Obamacare is unconstitutional. It was never care. It's treatment. And it's treatment for profit. And that seems to be a bigger problem. And so we also then have this treatment that comes on as we have products that we buy. And we have licenses regulations that the government allows. And I've told you some of those are like the mitigation between harms versus, nothing in the world's perfect anyway, but they're mitigations of known harms or knowable harms if we would hope, but really known harms which has been exploited against you. And there's been a story coming through with Johnson & Johnson and cancer and some judicial discussions that have come down, some jury verdicts against Johnson & Johnson. Well, it's also coming out now, and in some regard I don't see why this is such a surprise once we understand what was really going on. The point about this report here is that you may try to care for yourself, and you may be advertised, your public opinion may be such that you've been told that something's good for you when you're actually being misinformed. And I say that's non-full disclosure. That's what the government does. That's what corporations learn to do, and they're given license to do that. In fact, government propaganda is that at all. Advertisement is propaganda of some sort. They just want you to buy their stuff. It could be as innocent as that. But the problem is when you're going to be a danger, when there's something of a danger to you, and the people that are offering you something know that and don't tell you, now we got a little bit different condition. What's coming out now is that J&J, Johnson & Johnson, knew for decades that asbestos lurked in its baby powder. And so we're having a deception here that was not disclosed. It was not even disclosed properly to the government. However, if you look and read this story carefully, you realize that they'll talk about an influence, and the people who are like against J&J here doing this, they're kind of against the condition, and I think they overlook a bit on pointing out problems, but they don't say, well, this is systemic and we have another problem. In the fact that you'll read in here that there was, again, an administrative process and procedure that nobody else participated in, that this company was able to have the government prefer a certain test, the quality and resolution of the test of which guaranteed whatever the contaminant was could meet a 1% level and not be seen. And so here we see inside this story how the mechanism already in place that allows right out in front of everybody's face, the ability for anyone, not just this company, to manipulate, if you will, if I can say it, that manipulation, the FDA, I think it was in this case, to prefer a test. Well, isn't that the same as I've been calling out in the problem with 5G and the federal experts that the FCC looks at? And when you look at those private third parties, they're missing a whole lot. That's like a test that the FCC agrees to that was somehow agreed to that needs to be addressed first. The test itself hides harms. And I wanted us to see in this story, that very agreement is in this story, that there was a preferred, there was an administrative procedure and a preferred test that if any of y'all had understood this at the time, you would be in that and you would say, wait a minute, but that test will hide 1% of a problem. Now, it may take a more technical view, but I don't know. Are we all going to just lay down and die because we're stupid or something? Or are we going to start taking responsibility for certain things? Now, the J&J wasn't disclosing that they had some of this in their product. They were claiming they didn't. But then we see the tests agreed by the government gave what we would perceive as being the license to pollute a little bit, wouldn't it? But it wasn't really it wasn't really by the test an overt criminal intent. It was that by choosing it, they could hide the criminal intent. And that looked lawful. And these are the kinds of subtleties I'm saying when I talk to you about how we stop this. We have to go back in, and I know I don't like it. I'm not saying I like any of this. I'm saying this is what needs to be done, not what we want to do. The standards that are set, that are being accepted, aren't being challenged. No different than authority isn't challenged, jurisdiction's not challenged. Those are subtly different. You got to understand that. The limit and extent of certain things that are in the government being done that come out that harm us, we just blame government instead of looking and saying, "Wow, this system was set up to allow it." If there was no one else to say anything, those that were speaking win. Being crickets isn't speaking. And again, this is within the news, we have more notice of certain things that are going on. We have problems. These companies will go for a profit. They knew it was there. Now, to maybe a little bit of their credit, they did work hard to clarify and get rid of even that test. They knew they had hardly anything. But, I mean, looking at talc, if you just look at the mineral, you know that there's minerals and minerals and minerals and minerals, folks. That's how nature, that's what the earth is. And nothing's perfect. And so that the government didn't look and say, wait a minute, you're going to have some contaminants. It's pretty interesting. But that they agreed to a test that allowed for 1% contaminant and less than 1% was enough is where the problem starts. Almost in innocence, I can see how this could happen. So in a way, I almost can't blame it until after all these court cases, people who wouldn't take it anymore and sued, even if they lost, they were able to go in the process, and the process of a court case allows you discovery. And through all these years of court cases getting discovery, just clawing at the company to get whatever discovery, taking a step back and looking at all the discovery that was made, getting a hold of all the discovery from all the cases, finally shows through the evidence of the communications, all that showed that the company was not being forthcoming, if I can say it that much. Now, this opens up a whole other thing. But it took people stepping up, saying enough is enough. In this case, it certainly took the attorneys to do so. And whatever their motivation was, I guess. I don't know. It's usually bucks. Some of these people you hear are it's in their heart to help people. They realize the skullduggery in the system. But not just that. I don't want to focus on just that. I want to say, listen, that happens. There's a mechanism behind why that happens. We're seeing it now. If we didn't see it before, if I didn't see it before, and I didn't, I certainly appreciate that it's there right now. But I went a little further than seeing it and complaining about it. I said, okay, well, here's a couple things that I don't want to see. Let's put it in the context that this wasn't one of the subject matters, but it happened this summer. I really don't want to be burned up by a forest fire. Paradise wasn't my example. We had our own forest fire. Now, maybe I better understand this a little bit better. And even though we've been working on that problem for probably 4 years now, that was an excuse for me to go look at forest fires if I had none before. That, well, it's going to come, if it comes over, we're already alert 1. It's not very far from alert 3, and we're going to be burned up. To start saying, well, I better start taking some of these things, important things, to make them important and be responsible enough to carry them through, to figure out how do we limit our risk to that. There's nothing going to be perfect about these answers. But when we're not participating, and now we see all these years J&J got away with it because they were able to have a say that nobody was interested at all. I almost wonder, not to diminish the non-disclosure harm, but, isn't this somewhat of a self-inflicted wound? And you say, well, but we shouldn't have to. Yeah, I agree with that. But if we're not engaging, we don't have an understanding of how we're going to fix the reason why we have to engage. We have to do fix that. And this is I think the accountability thing. There isn't much. And so until we're involved and we start seeing the nuance of that, the government that is supposed to be looking out for us has been left to run wild. And we can only see that's a natural law that it would run wild without its own constraint. Without its own leashes being, it breaks out of a leash, out off of a chain every time. And we let it, so it learns to do that. And so I think we have a little part to play as I get more and more into looking at all this. It wasn't a joke to make a dynamic government that was supposed to protect itself and the people too. And the people included non-people. Because why? It was a commerce base. And I keep saying that people underappreciate that condition, and that happened at the beginning. It happened before the beginning, actually. All right? So we'll go back, lost on that. So we have things that we use, things that we're told is okay. We have court systems that are there to grind away, and I don't like it, but that's the system until we figure out how to fix that part. And some of this is really a plan inside the system we know is corrupt anyway. Again, the Bar Association controls a lot of this. But there's no accountability to that. It's a self-accountability, which ends up being no accountability. Until we address that one, that's another layer of the problem. That starts to get this thing to roll out. We have court systems that allow certain conditions. There's remedies that are there for tools that we, whether we engage them ourselves or understand them at all is not the point. The point is they're there, and that people do engage them. And if you look in the world, you see how unseparate everything is, how integrated things are. And I said, if you're under this rule of law, you're underneath a control structure, and it's not different. It's not distinct. They may speak about it in different ways, but it ends up being a general control that affects a global range. It's not stuck in one jurisdiction. And I'm always interested when those pop up. And one of those popped up that you think, we look at these judges, these courts, and I talk about the Bar Association, and you start talking about how these attorneys are all working, interact together or not, how these systems, these plans roll out, how the arguments are made or not made to bring up the point. Like I said, I'm always interested that the origination of the Obamacare tax didn't come out of the House like the Constitution says it's supposed to, yet it hasn't failed for that all these years. Why? What Bar Association member is not looking at that, or intentionally so? That should be the first thing you do. I mean, anybody who's in law or in these battles, if you will, in these challenges, in these questions as to the limit, has to look at jurisdiction and authority as the very first thing. Why don't they? So when stories come up that people respond in everywhere else but where the rule happens in a court, I take notice of that, just if nothing else, to say, oh, look how integrated this global order actually is. You want to start seeing the global order, stop the conspiracy ideas, and start actually finding the ones that are existing. I don't care if the Queen's a reptile. I really don't care. What about one of her henchmen called an esquire, attorney, a barrister, who's working within a system that has control over 5/7 of the earth? I want to know about that system. And here we hear a little bit of this. Not the Queen, but maybe an extension to the Church of England, to the Vatican. Listen to this. Super injunction. Ever heard of such a thing? Super injunction silences news about Vatican officials' child molestation conviction. A super injunction. Who ever heard of such a thing? But this is an issue where the third highest Vatican official was convicted of sexually molesting choir boys in Australia. And an injunction issued that no news would report anything about it. And guess what? Instead of being the news and being able to issue their notice to you what the news is, they complied with an order of a court in one country, globally, over a Vatican official. One Brave website did very carefully report on the matter after doing what? After going to attorneys and discussing it with Australian attorneys before they even printed. In other words, they were getting the implied correct check through bar members in order to be able to even report on this. This fascinated me. Look at the lock that is on this by an order of a court in one country. If you don't think there is a global order, no, it's not the one they talk about, you hear all the time. It's the one that exists. And it sits right here in this story. Then maybe I should just stop. You can do the research on this stuff. It's out there. It just blows me away. We have all these things going on, and we don't really pay attention. But there's another story on this. Vatican number 3 on trial for historical child sex charges. That was a report that did come out, but it got quashed pretty quickly. Now, it wasn't just a trial. They don't want to give the information. This guy was convicted over this. The thing about it, not just how heinous that was, the conviction, but that it was silenced. The gruesomeness of all that is silenced in the world. Should fascinate you. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. What is the power in the world, especially touching, in particular, the Vatican, if you understand this connection? And I don't talk too much about it all. It's there to be found, some of it. And some things I told you, I just found it, didn't collect it up. I didn't carry it as documents that I could prove to you. I was looking for where America went. It led me through this trail. It wasn't relevant to my stack of papers that I never actually stacked, because I found out this whole thing is a setup. You live in an open air prison globally. This world order thing is a cover. They want to focus you on something else about the world order, and then everybody wants to make their little market, so they start calling everybody names. We've got reptiles running, aliens, all this other stuff. It's all much more simple than that. It's actually mind-blowingly organized already, and there's a couple of paths that do it. And they always end up into these areas that I'm always fascinated by. What is a super injunction that has global effect that everybody trembles before even mentioning it, and doesn't mention it actually? They actually don't get the real total story out. We do not know the total story on this. Who is so powerful that you even the third most important Vatican official, and I read to you about the power structure there. He happens to also be the treasurer, I think, if I understand correctly. Who paid for this millions and millions of dollars of defense, and he lost, folks. No one's talking about all this. But anyway, I want to focus on it. I found just the super injunction idea, where I know that there's a limit to jurisdictions and authorities. The super injunction idea was just a fascination to me. How does that exist? And yet it does. Look at the effect. Look at the trepidation one website needed to do when you read the story. What they needed to decide before they decided to actually print something about it. What's in the world, folks? Very fascinating. Just very interesting. You see, I tell you about limits, and then you see this thing that almost shows that there's no limits, and I'm wondering, why? What is the penalty? And in a way, I'm saying that as a real question. How timid is the world against these men, folks? There's power structures, apparently, that terrify people. And I may be naive enough to not understand that, so I may not be... If I had information, I wouldn't know not to print it. But, I mean, I'm not that position, so maybe that's why I don't have the information at this point. What is the power in this world that keeps this silence going is just amazing to me. I'm not going to even say it means anything. I'm saying what allows it. And if we can't even do that much on a global scale, do you think we have much power as peoples in the world? We, the peoples, have a whole lot of work to do. And until we do, it's these kinds of things that start happening. Even after a conviction, we can't get the proper information. It just kind of harkens back to the Kennedy assassination, doesn't it? This wasn't even a killer, a murder, or public execution of a public official. It's just a conviction of a crime that they've been doing for all this time underneath the color of benefits to everybody. It's global, folks. It's just not any one place. There are things afoot globally. We are told of certain things that if we don't dig them up ourselves, that we're just told things and we agree that they're fact. In fact, I was asked to respond something about the California fires. I don't even know how to respond to it. Now, the first picture doesn't even. The statement under the first picture, I kind of don't have a statement. It's just not even factual. Where do I begin? And this is what the misinformation in the world is out. There's other proofs to do. They want to talk, if I can use the word precise and exact and proof and evidence enough times, I guess you believe I have exact proof and evidence, and it's nothing. Because there's other things that would, if you are open to it, that would have to be pressed against the fact of anything in order to make it the truth of what you're looking at, or at least the best you can construct. And this is that kind of thing. You cannot construct. They don't want you to know this stuff for a reason. These people that apparently have secret power over the world to shut almost everybody down, except one, and then to a limit. It's, to me, I just kind of get lost in that thought. Who has that kind of power? And here's the point for me. See, I ask that because I really don't know of anything that has that kind of power. How naive am I, folks? And so when I look at that, I have to say, man, I'm going to have a whole lot different bar to set for people. The whole world is shivering in its timbers, and I'm kind of sitting here, well, what's to shiver? What's to be afraid of here? And yet that's there, folks. Don't disregard what I'm saying. It's there. I'm naive to it. I don't understand it. I don't agree with it. I'd call it out in a heartbeat. You may not hear from me after that, but I don't even know that much, do I? But here's the fear. You don't respond because of this fear. And those that do fear act in trepidation of something. And I'm trying to bring you an idea that says, listen, you don't even get into that room. You just start bringing the stuff out in a way that's not even a possibility for you. Now, I have my detractors, but that doesn't change my experience about all this. So we have a super injunction. Are you kidding me? A global super injunction that actually has people afraid in the corners. Should be an interesting thing to look at. Moving on here, it's the consequences of not being told things. Moving on through technology like Johnson & Johnson not disclosing they had asbestos fibers of a certain type, and they even got into the nuances of the fiber and the asbestos and the type, and you get a little bit of an idea and an instruction on mineralization. It's kind of interesting. But we're not disclosed of harms, and they try to cover it for profit. and then they figure out that they're going to get caught, so how are they going to cover it? It's just a big cover-up thing. You see how the government can be manipulated even when it's trying to be just neutral. You can see how that can happen, and that happens because we don't speak up. And that kind of got me to thinking about this other non-disclosure that you start to hear and find as we move along, where we're being told about the medical treatments, not cures, and the FDA is helping us to understand that they're safe or recognize it's safe, all this nonsense terminology, there's things that aren't really what they are. Then we run across a story where we're told, like after the fact, and because a problem developed and the system itself starts to eat on itself, like I was talking about, we're moving on now to we're told is good for us, or we're going to be imposed upon because the government says it's okay, and then you start finding the cracks in the porcelain, but this time it's really fast, but only after something happened that was kind of out and hit the wall of beyond. And not many people are willing to go hit that wall. There's a super injunction on everybody's consciousness within a special study, in this case gene editing, that no one wants to bring up the harms, because if they did today, they wouldn't have a job, because the harms that they have to bring up are serious. And here we have this story now, where we're talking about, since the twins that were supposedly and genetically engineered and came to fruition, and now are the girls in the world that were supposedly first human CRISPR victims. They don't even know what's going to happen in the future. We have a report that comes out. I tell you about these unintended consequences. Well, here's the report. Unintended consequences have included enlarged rabbit tongues and extra pig vertebrae, as bioethicists warn of hubris. And that's the subtext of this title: Big Tongues and Extra Vertebrae, the Unintended Consequences of Animal Gene Editing. This is coming out all at a time when the FDA allows gene modification through the CRISPR method that I've been telling you, watch out. They've never been able to answer these unintended consequences, these mutations that go on, these changes in how the cell responds, just as a defense mechanism. I've been talking to you about this for years. Well, here it is. The purported birth last month of the world's first gene-edited human babies, claimed by the Chinese scientists, spurred a wave of global outrage. This is the super injunction. What power is out there? This is their conscience. But the problem is they can't say it, because if they do, it would shut the whole thing down, wouldn't they? When they find out the unintended consequences have a real force and effect. Scientists have denounced the as-yet confirmed experiment as irresponsible in the development of the reinforced fears that redesigning the DNA is moving ahead too fast and without necessary oversight. Enough said. You can go read it. What have I been saying? They're moving and allowing CRISPR technology with these unintended consequences, which are not unknown. We already know that. If I hadn't heard it or felt it myself back in the 70s about this technology as stories to us, the future coming, I certainly have had them in the last few years when they're telling us that they're there. They're moving too fast. But look at, they're moving too fast, admittedly so now. And evidence that when they use this condition, they change genes that alter the physical structure of the thing that they're doing, the unintended consequences. Folks, they're already doing this in your foodstuffs. And it's okay. This, to me, is the J&J problem. Well, let's make a test that we can only see the resolution. We can't see 1% of the stuff by the test, and that's the pollutant that we're putting in is just under 1%. So the test resolution's not fine enough to find it. Well, if I'm not looking for unintended consequences, I'm not going to see none, am I? Or if my test for unintended consequences is what the government allows the corporation to tell me, the government, I'm not going to see them, are they? So you have to, if you start looking at what I've done today, you start pulling together now the knowledge over time that's exposed through other people's conditions, and you wrap them together in different subject matter areas to show that in no area is protected against these problems. You can start moving, I think, today to start to assert against, in an administrative fashion, as even just a letter of objection. You can start pulling together the failures of the past have led to the harms that we see now, which cannot be any different in the future. if we continue to allow the myopic view, the statement from the profiteer, the deaf, we become deaf to the very thing the scientists today are now complaining that the scientists today have not told the FDA the unintended consequences that they're afraid the little girls may have suffered, the pigs that suffered, are in your food already. And no one's taken a look at that. And where you're blind to something and you're required to take a hard look, you failed before we got going. Okay, I just laid out a little bit of a discussion for anybody who wants to pick that up and apply it to any other thing. Until we start to talk this way and address the things this way, like I said, Catherine Austin Fitz, until these people who see this problem, you're not wanting it's not enough. Until you see the method and application and counter that, the agenda rolls over all. So in this story, big tongues and extra vertebrae. I didn't even know about this stuff, but here it is. I didn't know, the existence. I knew that it was possible because it's just not possible. Now we have a study here that explains this problem, all based on what? We went past what I told you the bioethicist would be adjusting and agreeing to as they went along. People went past when they jumped into trying to modify human beings, they call them, little animals. That shocked everybody. There's this moral super injunction on our consciousness. So I want to drive that back to the other super injunction, the global order. See, there's an underlying thing in there that does control this world on a global scale. And until we kind of address that in us, this stuff's going to continue. We're going to allow all this. But this is the proof, if you needed anything before, more proof in the news about what the problems are as spoken by the experts. The people in the field are now telling you, explaining what they're seeing in the labs that they aren't telling you anywhere else, that a company will never tell you. These are supposedly the scientists doing the studies, not the companies utilizing the byproducts to go do it. Like when we finally found out that human fetal tissue is used as a flavor enhancement for what? Pepsis? Yeah? See how that works, folks? They just don't tell us, and we don't really pay attention. Big tongues and extra vertebrae and these CRISPR, what happens to the plants that they put? What happens to the viruses and the bacteria that they put in to fabricate byproducts in things? In some regard, I don't have a problem with a biologically genetically modified organism that creates a chemical somehow, like alcohol. I just don't have a problem somehow with that. The problem I have with that is the biological escape. That's the problem I have with that. But if it's just an inert chemical, if you will, not inert, but if it's just a chemical, somehow I don't have a problem with that. That's a lot more acceptable to me. I haven't looked at any closer than that part because I haven't had to. My concern is the stuff I consume, or that people consume, or that we allow in our society that gets into us by whatever mechanism. We're hearing the unintended consequences I told you about were there years and years ago. We're finally, took all these years to get the evidence, and what happened is that we violated even the people that are doing it. They violated themselves. And so I'm saying, here's the evidence, folks. Bring it up, those of you that are interested, because gene-edited food is coming soon to supermarket shelves. What are we going to do? Have broccoli with a third spine or something, or tongues coming out of what? What do we expected? But here, the problem with the food that we're going to be eating, like vegetables, we're not going to know about the mutations. Thank you, Grimner, for what you do at reallibertymedia.com. I hope something I said today, folks, will give you something insight, some way to approach this thing. Get yourself active into things that we need to fix. Like, share, send out, spread around. Spread the word, folks. Appreciate that. I'll be here next week. Tech Diffs or Nature Willing.
another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Well, that's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.